Once this was a land alive with lions and wolves, jaguars and bears. There were great sharks swimming the seas, and eagles aloft in the air. This was a world patrolled by great predators.
We've underestimated the force of predation in nature. I mean, we almost eliminated it. We've almost eliminated it from the globe. And this was one of the strongest forces we have in nature. Restoring this function in nature, I think, is very important. It's one of our biggest challenges to humanity, because the simplest answer, the easiest answer, is to just get rid of them. They are very, very hard animals to live with.
It is one of the great paradoxes of our existence. Out of death comes life. Ever since Darwin, predation has been proposed as one of the evolutionary drivers of the diversity of life. And now, at the dawn of the 21st century, Darwin's successors are adding hard evidence to the theory of entire chains of life flowering in the presence of great predators. Yet these are bittersweet discoveries, for the great predators have all but vanished from sight, just as the value of these lords of nature comes into focus. Leading scientists working around the globe are now learning that these much-feared predators may in fact hold a key to life itself. They find it is the presence or absence of top predators that affects the health of an entire ecosystem. And in one of these places, a place called Yellowstone, scientists have found a heartening glimpse of rebirth with the return of its top predator. Bill Ripple, an ecologist from Oregon State University, first came to Yellowstone National Park in the mid-1990s, with big predators far from his mind. Ripple was concerned about plants, in particular Yellowstone's aspen trees, and what had become their disturbing and mysterious demise. Ripple knew the aspen as one of the premier magnets of wildlife in the mountains of the American West.
And it struck me, why in this world-famous bastion of nature should the aspen be dying? I thought, somebody ought to be solving that mystery.
Ripple had learned of the dying aspens from his colleague Robert Beshta, who had independently come upon another disturbing mystery to solve in Yellowstone.
I first visited the Lamar River in 1996 and was amazed at what I saw. Stream banks were rapidly eroding, their ancient soils being washed downstream. Willows were eaten down to nubs, and young cottonwoods were all but absent from the system. It was a huge problem, and the question was why? And I decided then and there that someday I would come back and attempt to unravel the answer to this question.
Together, Ripple and Beshta began what would become an odyssey of discovery. venturing back and forth over the coming years to gather data and measure the ongoing evolution of Yellowstone's ailing ecosystems.
This must be one of the oldest trees in the park.
Yeah.
Looking through historical photos and examining Yellowstone's surviving trees, what they quickly came to realize was that whatever was to blame, it had begun many years before.
We found that nearly all of the aspens stopped reproducing in the 1930s and 40s, and that led us to examine the potential culprits behind this event. The only major event that coincided with that last generation of aspen was the extermination of Yellowstone's wolves.
For lack of wolves, Yellowstone's aspen had apparently stopped growing. Bechta, watching his cottonwoods, would soon come to similar conclusions.
When wolves disappeared from Yellowstone, cottonwoods stopped growing from little plants into large trees. They just shut down.
Ripple and Bechta's discovery of Yellowstone's uncanny link between failing forests and missing wolves served as an omen for much of America. For not just Yellowstone, but the entire country had been nearly swept clean of its big predators during an eradication campaign that waged war on any animal deemed a threat to livestock or game populations. By the 1930s, most of the lower 48 had recorded their last wolf.
I grew up in a ranching family, and we've been very much a part of this history of eradicating predators. The paradigm of ranching was to clean the rangeland of all threats, not only to the livestock, but to the grazing base. And that meant eliminating, creating a silent landscape. The list of predators you had to get rid of was just like this, starting with grizzly bears, jaguars, cougars, wolves, then lynx, then bobcats, and pretty soon you just sort of wiped it all out.
One man above all, the naturalist and writer ALDO Leopold, would capture the ambivalence of American society toward its most controversial predator. In his groundbreaking 1944 essay, Thinking Like a Mountain, Leopold penned what to this day stands as one of our most eloquent and celebrated paeans to the wolf, a wolf Leopold himself had helped shoot.
In those days, we had never heard of passing up a chance to kill a wolf. In a second, we were pumping lead into the pack, but with more excitement than accuracy. How to aim a steep downhill shot is always confusing. When our rifles were empty, the old wolf was down. We reached the old wolf in time to watch a fierce green fire dying in her eyes. I realized then, and have known ever since, that there was something new to me in those eyes, something known only to her and to the mountain.
Leopold's views on predators evolved across a lifetime. He started out with a view, like most people of his time and age, that, as they used to say, the only good predator is a dead predator. And he carried that out as part of his official activity with the Forest Service. But it did not take long, maybe about a 10-year period during his middle career, where he began to shift that view on predators.
Curt Meine has traced the changes in Leopold's views that came with the emergence of ecology, the study of nature's myriad and vital connections. As Leopold himself helped to develop this new science, he would apply its principles to forestry and to wildlife conservation, and he would communicate those principles to an ever-widening audience of readers.
Before 1927, 1928, people didn't think about food webs and food chains much. They didn't think about the connections between plants and animals in a landscape. If you're managing forests, you're managing trees. If you were managing game populations, you were focused only on a few species. So it was really only in that period at the late 20s when this new science of ecology began to lift the veil, as Leopold said, on a new and much more complex view of the natural world.
And with Leopold's urgings, that complex view increasingly began to include nature's topmost predators. Leopold traveled extensively, examining the relationships between predators, their prey, and forests. From the high mountains and plateaus of the Southwest, to the canyonlands of Utah, to the intensively managed forests of Germany, Leopold brought back warnings of lands ravaged by too many deer and elk, lands conspicuously lacking their great predators. There was no escaping the specter of forests damaged and weakened by the dense herds, a grim reality Leopold would discover as well at home on his farm in Wisconsin.
In one of his field note entries, he notes the deer trails that are running through the area in front of the shack and how all the trees along those trails have been browsed to death, all the young trees that he planted.
Cristina Eisenberg is a Leopold scholar at Oregon State University and a conservation biologist, re-examining Leopold's controversial observations of the interactions between wolves, their prey, and forests. With the encouragement of Nina Leopold Bradley, scientists like Eisenberg have continued the elder Leopold's work at the farm, near the well-known converted chicken coop that he fondly named the Shack. Eisenberg notes that the impacts of high deer populations on forest growth, the phenomenon that Leopold described 60 years earlier, can still be seen.
All chewed.
So everything here, not just the aspen and the white pine, is showing anything that's edible to deer is showing a browse line. And it got browsed every year. So it's about 1 meter in height, and it's about 4 years old at least. An aspen tree, if it's left alone, it'll grow 1 meter a year. So a 4-year-old aspen, it'll be like about that tall. So when you see something like this, you look at this tortured tree, and it's not being allowed to grow. It keeps trying to grow, and it can't. Here's another old aspen. This one dates back to the 1920s or so. And there really isn't anything in between these old aspen and these young aspen. And this is because of too many deer, and deer that are not afraid to stand around and just eat. So if wolves were in this system, although Leopold's hypothesis is that you would not see a stand that looked like this. You would get a lot of very different age classes happening in here.
So Leopold steps forward, starting in the early 1940s and through for the rest of his life until his passing in 1948. He would become a well-known public figure, arguing for this more careful management of the deer herd and even allowing the wolves to be tolerated.
At the time that Dad was advocating saving the wolves, it was a time of a real depression for him because the Conservation Commission did not agree with Dad's philosophy.
If we could keep them here, then they could continue to play this role as a partner in the evolutionary drama, as he would sometimes put it, of coexisting with the deer populations and, of course, with the people who had settled this part of our state and this part of our region. And it would become a very bitter and vitriolic dispute through the 1940s as Leopold tried to convey a very difficult lesson to a generation that was not quite ready to hear it.
And he was being condemned by the local newspapers, by the local hunters, by the Conservation Commission. They were all smiling at him and saying, well, they were belittling him. It was a very sad time for Dad.